sthira-sukham āsanam. The asana, the seat or posture, should be steady and easy. I'm sure you've heard this verse before. It's maybe the most quoted verse of the Yoga Sutras, second only to Yoga's Chittavritti Nirodha. The yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. And I'm really always curious about the things that we say again and again and repeat from each other. And I think that sometimes things are repeated so often that they maybe lose their meaning, or not lose their meaning, but maybe we don't look so profoundly into how it unpacks and remember what the context was of how it arose. So obviously this is from the Yoga Sutra, which is a text which is mostly focused on the achievement of samadhi, of, the extreme clarity of meditative focus and absorption, of the loss of your, the dissolving of your ego as you become totally absorbed in meditative practice. So for Patanjali, of course, being steady and easy in your seat, because the word asana, as I'm sure you know, originally meant sitting. It comes from the verbal root as, to sit. And so for Patanjali, it's all about sitting down and being quiet so that you could achieve the ultimate meditative stillness. In the Bhagavad Gita, we see this phrase, sthira-āsanam, actually referring to a physical seat that you sit on. So like today, my asana is a nice buckwheat cushion right here. Having sat on your asana, then you turn your mind towards a single object. I'm quoting now from the Gita, chapter 6, minding your thoughts and the activity of your senses, linking yourself to yoga for the purification of yourself. And I find it really interesting, like, how did we get from asana meaning, something you sit on, to the posture of a seat, to then the fact that asana is now is used to refer to our physical shapes that we make, and even like movements and flows on a yoga mat. How then, like I said, how does this sthira-sukham āsanam suddenly now start to apply to the postures that we do, this movement practice? It seems strange to apply that principle because it's exactly the opposite. It's all about sitting down. Well, for me, and this is why I wanted to make this video, is that yoga is a fractal practice. And what I mean by that is that the micro principles also apply on a macro level. And there's a lot of like transferable skills that you get from doing a physical yoga practice or a meditative practice that you can take out into your life. You notice patterns that repeat in humanity and in nature. Things like, the yoga practice, you need to just show up again and again and again, even when you don't want to, and just the act of showing up without expectation means that you make progress. Similar principle can apply in your life. Also, often, if you want to go more forward, the more you push, it can actually hinder you. And sometimes you just need to relax into it. Very relevant to what I'm going to talk about today. And so I believe that sthira-sukha, even though originally it was meant to apply to a physical seat, actually talks about very human universal qualities of things that we struggle to do, whether we're sitting down or standing up or doing stuff out in the world. So let's look at these different principles. We talked a little bit about what āsana means. We'll talk about sthira and sukha. So sthira means steady. The words are actually related linguistically. And this is a key quality that the yogi strives to cultivate. In chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali states that the way that we achieve yoga is by abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa being practice and vairagya being dispassion. And he then defines abhyasa as the effort to come back to steadiness, to be steady in your concentrated mind. So not that you can concentrate for just a second, but that you can be established in that. And the reason for that is because yoga understands that the world is a changeable and fluctuating place. This is a key recognition of like all of the yoga principles and traditions and philosophies. And what yoga asks us to do is acknowledge that and make peace with it and work to be stable and still and unflappable, even as everything whirls around us. Now, necessarily, because nature is whirling, in order to stop ourselves from being battered about by it all the time, we have to apply effort to kind of fight against the tide, right? So we actually have to apply effort to be still. Now, the thing is about effort is that it's so easy to overdo it, to become overly rigid, to become dogmatic, to become judgmental, to become, to injure yourself, to really just kind of overdo it altogether. Or there's the opposite danger, which is that you just don't apply enough effort and you're lazy and you just can't be bothered turning up today. And then you have all these reasons in your mind why you can't do it. And then in the end, you allow yourself to be battered around by the forces of all the influences around you without being able to hold yourself stable and still. So sthira is kind of like it's the practice of learning to apply appropriate effort. And as with all things, that is actually the most difficult thing. Extremes are easy. It's easy to go nuts and do too much, or it's easy to just completely I give up, I'm not going to do anything. Actually going into the middle is the most profound practice. This is why the Buddha emphasized the middle path. He tried all the different things. He grew up as a prince. He ate all of the delicious luxurious foods. And then he went to the opposite extreme and became so ascetic and starved himself so that you could see his bones, you could see his spine or whatever, all the way through his body. Now he said, no, you should, his suggestion for practice was that you eat just enough that you need to be alive and also healthy, and no more than that. And that is much harder. You know why? Because you have to be so present to notice when you're actually satiated, to notice when you've had enough, to not just mindlessly eat yet another cookie out the bag. You pay attention. Similarly, when you're doing your physical yoga practice or any yoga practice, you need to be so present to know when you're applying the right amount of effort to get into a position without injuring yourself or tiring yourself out. So it's a very skillful thing to do. So what about sukha? Sukha, it means ease, and it actually comes from, so su means good and kha means place. And it originally may have referred to the center of a wheel. So it's kind of like in order for a wheel to turn well, it has to be spacious, it has to be well balanced and well oiled. So that's the sukha, that's the easeful space. And I also like to think of it as not just ease and relaxation and kind of, niceness, making something nice. It's actually the active cultivation of sukha and turning away from dukkha. You maybe have heard this word dukkha. It's also in Buddhism really popular. Dukkha, the Buddha said, the first principle of Buddhism is that all of life is dukkha, suffering. So in yoga, we are asked to, recognize the fact that suffering is a thing, but that it's possible not to be attached to it. One of my favorite verses in the Bhagavad Gita at the moment, and I've referred to them before in these videos because I'm really sitting with it at the moment. Where is it? I'm even going to read it in Sanskrit. Tam vidya dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga samyatam. Yoga, let it be known that the unlinking of the union with suffering is known as yoga, which I like to think of like this. Yoga is letting go of your attachment to pain. Because it's so easy to just get settled in and be in your anger or in your suffering and be I'm sad, that's just the way it is. Actually, it's possible to kind of just loosen your attachment to that and turn back to the possibility of ease, of joy. So what it really means is a softening away from defensiveness. Sometimes we get into the yoga mat, applying a lot of effort and really working hard is a way of avoiding really feeling something. And it means allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. That's what sukha also entails, is that in order to be soft, you have to let your heart open and you have to allow yourself to feel something. You have to allow it to come. You have to allow yourself to feel something. So as you can see, sthira and sukha are actually opposites. And often in yoga practice, we do this thing where we try to do two opposing or apparently opposing things. But what I love about yoga is that you start to practice it and you realize it's not actually opposite at all. When you're doing a posture and you're standing there and you're trying to hold it and you push too hard and you're really like putting too much effort into it, and you start to quiver and pant, it actually becomes harder to be steady. And so sukha, it means just like softening back a little bit, releasing just a little bit of your effort and allowing yourself to abide in this space, applying this appropriate amount of effort. Often we see that in order to get stronger, we have to be softer. And the physical yoga practice teaches that, meditation teaches us that as well, that in order to be a sharper focus, sometimes we just need to actually stop trying so hard. Yoga shows us the paradoxical nature of reality. It shows us that yoga, the world looks dualistic, but actually it's possible to kind of transcend that duality. And that's exactly what Patanjali talks about in chapter 2. 2 verses later, after this sthira-sukham āsanam, he says, if you practice in that way, one is not afflicted by the dualities of the opposites. The hot and the cold and the happy and the sad and, the old and the young, you realize that these opposites, they're not so black and white. They're maybe a bit more swirly. I guess like my top right here, that's more representative of what reality is. So as you can see, these principles, they go so much further than just like sitting down. And the thing is that Patanjali recognized that. He's a beautiful psychologist. If you read the text, you can really feel that. He knows that for humans, it's hard to actually find that balance. And he knows that we can work too hard and we can be too lazy. It's a universal human dilemma of how much do you assert effort? How much do you kind of push your individual agency out into the world? And how much do you surrender? We have to have both. If you surrender too much, you become like a passive blob and you don't live. But if you push too hard, you create too much misery as well. You're not able to enjoy the mystery and openness of life itself. So here we're asked to do sthira-sukham. And āsana becomes, yes, your seat, but also your posture and also your life. Can you be steady and easy in everything that you do? So that's something to practice. You can let me know how you get on, perhaps. And until then, I'll leave you with that. Om Shanti.